It's the LIA Artcast, a show where a couple visual storytellers get together, take a walk around a topic, talk about it in the abstract, then talk about it in some kind of useful way. We are visual storytellers who think hard about visual storytelling so that you might too. My name is Jerzy Droz, cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hey, Jerzy, I'm Rob Stenzinger, a designer, coder, and facilitator, and looking forward to this topic tonight. How are you doing?
I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
Episode. I saw the title card when I hit turning the stream on live.
Yeah.
Episode 148. That's kind of crazy to think about that we're closing in on the sesquicentennial of the LIA Artcast.
Sure. That's it's an awesome number. Strange title, but yeah, it's 150, and especially when we're somewhere around 300 because or not even. I don't know. We're somewhere closer to 300 because we split into two podcasts that we go every other week, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because we did lean into art weekly at first, but then we switched to bi-weekly to be able to have just I don't know like that an easier hunt for topics and be like, oh, we're going to really emphasize this, but then we're going to go more emergent and open-ended with the Extra Lean podcast. Which normally we wait to mention that, but yeah.
If memory serves, Extra Lean, the show we do in between these shows, was originally a segment on the LIA Artcast. Wasn't it like the takeaway section? Isn't that what we used to call it?
It was, yeah. I think it sort of morphed out of takeaway and also morphed out of the emergent topic episodes that we used to do more frequently.
That's true. Yeah,
yep.
So now it's much more topic-driven. So if you're new to the show, yes, this is a show where a illustrator, cartoonist, and teacher teams up with an illustrator, cartoonist, game designer, and we talk about ways of communicating visually. And every 2 weeks we come up with a new topic to take on. This week's topic, you know this because you're watching this on YouTube or you downloaded this into your podcatcher on purpose. You know that this is going to have something to do with Manga Studio. And yes, we're going to be talking about composition, layout, and paneling. And paneling, and specifically paneling tools in Manga Studio, kind of putting a little bit of laser focus on that. But also to talk about paneling and composition and how page layout works in comics, and at least how it works for me in a broader sense. But before we do that, Rob, we got a style for this. Should we establish the style that we are going to explore this in, and then we'll get into our first break.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so the style today is I mean, we'll be purposefully very sketchy, right? It's not about making a final product, right? Is that where you're going with that? The sort of doodle
the
style
two sections that we're going to
yeah.
explore the show in.
Oh, gotcha. As far as how we plan to tackle, not the art that we'll be putting as we into the stuff as we explore it. But okay, so how we approach topics is that we like to think about them in the abstract and think about them conceptually, and just wrap our heads around like, well, why, and maybe scratch the surface on a how, like, but just get familiar with a topic. Almost like a mini talk on it, like you watched a presentation, but then there's a practical. We go to the next section where we call that on the ground, and we want something helpful that all of us get out of it. Like Jerzy and I try to practice and get something out of that. We try to do that to create things to share with you as well. So then it's not just like, oh wow, that's a neat idea. There's a thing that you could have in your mind. Maybe it's burning and urgent when you're done and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go open Manga Studio and try this. Awesome. Then we did our job.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And it's I took a baking class last year, and I remember one of the things the teacher emphasized was read the recipe and then read it again. Right. It's like spend some time intellectually grasping with this stuff and sort of pre-visualizing what you're actually going to be doing, then break out all the materials and do the thing. I like that style.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do. First segment's going to be talking about how layout and composition work. Then we're actually going to do some demo where I'm going to teach Rob how to use the paneling tool, largely inspired from last episode where Rob taught me JavaScripting. In style at any rate. But before we go there, okay, first break. We got sponsors of this show, Rob.
Indeed. They are us. And it's actually our projects. I mean, so we do lean into art. We provide that to you, and we'll mention our Patreon a little bit later in the episode, because that's one way to directly support us. But you can also support us through our other things that we make and that we gain experience from, and we love to share through this show as well. So things like boulderandfleet.com, which is a comic by Jerzy Drozd. And it's about a bird and a bear who are essentially these adventurers for hire. They have some interesting challenges, as almost freelancers all do. Except for them, they're in a world where, in this current story arc, they're dealing with the trying to protect this group of crystal miners from these crystal monsters who are a really a funny, engaging set of villains to deal with, because they're not just all raw and bad. They've got a lot of personality, and it's awesome. And plus, we're seeing things like Boulder really rise to some crazy intense challenge and whatnot, and it's good stuff. So Bird and a Bear, go on adventures, solve problems. You got to go read it. It's at boulderandfleet.com.
Wow, thanks, Rob. That was a really good pitch for the book. But then Rob makes video games, as I said at the top of this episode, and you made a game called This Panda Needs You. Look at the panda. Look at the title. That really should sell it all. But
Panda, buy it.
Panda needs you. Help the panda. But there's more to it than that. The panda needs your help because panda shows up. There's this nicely stacked, configuration of geometric shapes. Along comes this cloud. The cloud doesn't look evil, just looks like it's mischievous. Does what clouds do, what the wind does, blows, and knocks the shapes apart, knocks the configuration apart, and it's your job to put the shapes back together. Now, this is made expressly for young people, right, Rob?
Yeah, it's definitely targeted at a young age group, and it's meant to be this sort of engaging activity for like maybe 10 minutes at a time or what have you, and just gain exposure to like pattern recognition and behavior of physics and have some approachability through that, because kids love to stack blocks and knock them over. I actually love to stack blocks and knock them over.
I was gonna say, as somebody who loves things like Yoshi's Cookie, come on, it's not just for kids,
I've seen that too, because I've definitely tested with adults. People find it pretty relaxing and fun to play, and it's out for iPhone and iPad. Go to this-panda.com and you'll get a link to the App Store, and pick it up. It's $3.
So those are things that we make besides this podcast. But if the podcast is what you're here for first and foremost, then the next place you can go is leanintoart.com/workshops, where we have a whole bunch of videos archived there that you can download at a price of your naming. You name the price. Could be $0 if you want it to be. And you can download hours and hours of video instructional content, where these were actually more like real workshops that we led. So instead of it being a discussion show, it's more of, here is a skill set that we're going to teach you now. Here's a presentation. Here's an activity. leanintoart.com/workshops. So, ready to go 10,000 feet up, Rob? Did I miss anything?
Yeah. Let's start exploring this.
All right. The music means that we're now flying 10,000 feet up. We're going to talk about the topic in abstract, look at it from all the different angles we can think of, at any rate. Why think about this thing? Why think about composition? Why think about layout? And why monkey around with the paneling tool in Manga Studio? Rob, you, I think, very correctly noticed that Manga Studio has been a recurring topic on the show, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it keeps coming up. And, why do we think that is?
Well, for one, it's like the program I've been using almost exclusively for my comics work for the past couple of years now. I only open Photoshop now to crop images. And actually, I found out how to elegantly crop images in Manga Studio, so I don't even know if I'm going to be using Photoshop for that anymore. But yeah, I work almost entirely in it to make my comics. And we talked about it in episode 111, What's So Great About Manga Studio, and episode 134, Manga Studio on the tablet. I think for me, it's one of those things where I've used a lot of different software. I've been using Photoshop since 1995, Rob.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that it's been that long, and it has.
I know.
I remember when the history palette got implemented, and I was like, I get more than one undo.
Oh, yeah, that was actually a pretty big superpower. And,
Yeah.
you know, with a mixed bag, because all of a sudden now you can be extra indecisive.
Yes. But anyway, I've used a lot of different kinds of software over the years. Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, tried a bunch of different Windows programs. As longtime listeners of the show knows, that I've played around with a whole bunch of Android apps. You know, Layer Paint HD, Metabang Paint. I'm always interested in playing around with new ways to capture images and tell stories. But Manga Studio was the first time where it's also called Clip Studio Paint, long story. They're both the same program, Clip Studio Paint, Manga Studio, same thing, different delivery mechanism, long story. Anyway, and I think we covered that in the past episodes about Manga Studio. But Manga Studio was the first program that came along where I felt like this was designed to solve my specific problems, right? Photoshop is awesome. It is a super awesome program. But a lot of what I want to do was sort of like figuring out how to make Photoshop do what I wanted to do, whereas Manga Studio feels a lot like, no, this interface is specifically tailored to do what you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, because I think language is a big deal. I think Manga Studio speaks in the language of making comics, and at the very least illustrations, but no, really, I mean, both. There's something about, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, like, well, I mean, the idea that word balloons are represented, that like primitives and objects that are in comics are like first-class citizens and represented. It's not like stuff that you have to bring to it. It starts there already at the task of making comics.
Yeah. So that's a reason that it comes up a lot in the show. And also, I mean, I teach classes on using the software, and through the use cases my students find, I'm discovering new stuff about this program all the time. And because, you know, I got into my rhythm. I make comics my way, but once I've got my way of doing it, it's like there's no need to dig into these other sub-menus and stuff until somebody asks, well, how do you do, like, for instance, one that came up recently was, how do you use the panel cutting tool to cut 4 equal panels, which I've never needed to do because the way I lay out my pages is different than what a comic strip artist does. So that led me on a hunt. Like, how do you do that? Found it, right? So, like, it's interesting to me that even though it is, one could argue that making comics and illustrations is kind of a single use case, it's a very rich piece of software as well. God, I feel like I'm doing an ad for it, Rob. I don't mean to sound like I'm doing an ad, but I'm excited about it because it solves a lot of problems for me.
Yeah, our reason, well, we are not sponsored by them, which, oops, we probably should be. But it's hard to not be a bit of an ad when, yeah, I mean, so there's inherently a bit of rating and our sentiment coming through and details about it because, well, it's such a the tools we use are a big deal. They occupy so much of our time and experience in making things. So, yeah, you know, it's an incidental commercial at the very least.
Yeah. Okay, so, but we said 10,000 feet up. Talking about this in the abstract, how do you want to go about attacking this one, Rob?
So, okay, we're talking about layout. So we're not going to hit like, oh, this is a tour of everything in Manga Studio. We want to think about layout. Well, what are we dealing with when we're considering like the layout of a page? And I'm thinking like, and especially at the unit of a panel. Because we could talk about sound. We could talk about, right?
Yeah.
You know, sound design, eh?
Yeah. I know you're teasing me. You're intentionally waving a little red flag like this to get me to snort and go crazy about sound design. Don't tempt me, Frodo. But yeah, you're talking about like actually this goes back to an episode. I think it was episode 136. I did with Dan Mishkin. You were away, and Dan sat in the co-host chair, and we did a whole talk on visual composition and layout, but more, as Dan likes to call it, the syncopation between word and image in comics. But I'd like to step back even one more step back than that. And this is something I use in a lot of my workshops, and including some of those videos you can get at leanintart.com/workshops. But when I talk about what I call the 3 layers of visual rhythm, right? Because the concerns that I'm navigating when I'm doing the layout of a comics page is I'm thinking about visual flow, clarity, and rhythm. Okay, and so I'm going to go into those things each individually as I talk about this. But the 3 layers of visual rhythm is, one is you have the actual panel size and relationships themselves, regardless of the content in them, right? And let me step back a second and say that these things, even though I'm breaking this into a procedure, it is not this procedural. It is very much, like Dan called it, a syncopation. It's a dance back and forth, as dumb as that sounds. So panel shape and size is step 1. Whoop. Or the first layer. The second layer is the panel contents. Okay, so like you see here, here's the page, the panel layout, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It corresponds exactly to this, right? So there's the actual contents in the panels, right? And I wonder if you can see my cursor hovering over the screen. Probably not. It's probably too hard to see with this low resolution video capture, but right, we can see that there's panel 1 going across just the top third of the page, panel 1, 2, and 3. That panel 3 is that green box. Panel 4 is the other green box. Panel 5 is sort of part of panel 2, and panel 6 is that car that's overlaid over panels 2 and 5. Anyway, that sounds really complicated in audio. Watch the video. But so,
well, if you have the layout is roughly a stack of well, they're parallel stacks, essentially, 3 and 3, that are well, let's see, and not like this, because were you talking about 1 through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah.
Or okay, 8. Okay, cool.
Yeah, there's 8 in all, right? Because then we get to that bottom third of the page, and there's that one big panel on the left, and then that one big open panel on the right. And perhaps this might not even be a good example, but what I'm, if you look at this first version of the page with the empty panels, we can think of each of them, and I do mean this seriously with this rhythm idea, we can think of each of them as having essentially a number of beats, right? And a smaller panel has less beats, a bigger panel has more beats. And so we can look at this page, and I do this with my students all the time, kids who've never engaged with comics in this way, and I'll say, how many beats does panel 1 have? And they'll say 1. Say, how many beats does panel 8 have? And they'll say 3. Right? We intuit this very easily. But then when you start putting information in the panels, more visual information has more rhythm. Right? And not more rhythm as in a better quality of rhythm, but there's more beats in more visual information. So panel 1 suddenly changes. Now it's a 1-beat panel, but with like 1.5 to 2 beats of content inside of it. And that's where that syncopation comes in, right? Is this making sense, or am I being really abstract here?
I think it's both, right? Where it's an abstract idea. It's kind of you're thinking of, it's almost, I'm going to say, I think you're roughly talking about semiotics and patterns of language, and how essentially how one symbol can all of a sudden become a bunch of symbols inside, or like you can write on a piece of paper, buy milk, and it can take up the whole darn page. Or you could try to plan out your entire year by day. There's going to be a lot more information on that one single page versus the other single page. And
it's
you
a great
might
way of putting it.
try to it's just volume of information, and the little, if you're trying to section out the volumes into smaller volumes and panels. It sounds like lofty, and I guess in some ways trying to say it like that, but that's what I think the job of putting stuff on a page is.
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's like it's like a rephrasing, and tell me if I'm getting what you're putting down.
No, you're shining a light, and we're putting words to something that most visual storytellers and readers do intuitively. We just sense it, we feel it. This comes from the same kind of places in our mind that where dream comes from, like like visual memory and things like that. It's a very complex thing that's happening, but it's something that happens almost behind the scenes and effortlessly. And it's not something that I'm like calling into. I'm not summoning this every time I'm making a page. But when I'm troubleshooting it, I sometimes go back to this, right? So then the third layer of visual rhythm is the sound elements, and this isn't me being a sound nerd. This is really, words have a rhythm. If you say Mississippi and you say milk, there are different rhythms to those two words. There's different cadences. There's different timing. So the type of phrasing and the type of sentences I construct as the characters interact with one another is going to change the rhythm of that page. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about layout. I'm talking about that the first step is establishing that initial rhythm on the page. And then there's also clarity too, right? So like, there's an example that I talked about with Dan that I didn't get to talk about with you, Robin. Let me pull it up real quick. Do you remember looking at this page by any chance in episode 136?
So no, I actually listened to 136.
So look at this page from a comic called Dead Man, from DC Comics. And it's a very trippy scene. And Dan and I both made it very clear that this is an outlying case, but it demonstrates very vividly this idea of that comics panels have their own individual identity, but they have a relationship to one another on the page as well, right? And this is what I mean by clarity. Clarity in not only the moments you choose, but choosing moments that interact with one another on the page, not always in a garish, tricky way like this, but in a way that creates a larger meaning, a meaning greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Well, this page very much demonstrates the at least one or more of the Gestalt principles of design, right?
Okay.
Because it kills me to not be able. I don't have them like super easily at hand, but you essentially have they are patterns to observe and how things are composed and expressed that let us associate and create relationships among things, which can cause expectations. When you looking at this page, so just for those who are just listening to the podcast, and that's awesome. Thank you for downloading it. But like you're missing out on I'll describe this quickly. You've got something where it's essentially it looks like a face that has been composed of 6 segments. It's almost like someone's sliding together the pieces of a puzzle that form a face. But then it's crazy when you notice that you focus on any one puzzle piece. It's not like they are actually doing what you initially expect, because now there is completely different information inside, where this must have been a heck of a puzzle solving exercise for someone to compose this set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels, because it looks like this face where there's a character coming in from the side, five cards. You look at any one card, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that's not actually part of a bigger picture. That's a picture on itself. Instead of the forehead of this character, you look at this card, it's like the forehead and the left eye of the character. It's actually some tiny person from a really distant, high above shot that is looking across some kind of landscape, and they're shouting. And
there's like
out.
a woman's face. Like the landscape becomes a woman's face. Look at his eye becomes her lips, and her eye is in the upper left-hand corner of the panel.
What? Oh my God! So I don't get this. Was this someone's master's thesis or something? Holy moly! This has so many layers to it.
Right. So like this is the kind of stuff that like when I read comics, when I see this kind of thing happening, I get very excited because it demonstrates the overall principle of visual storytelling as only comics can do very well, right? Because comics comics as a medium doesn't work unless we make these connections and relationships between disparate moments. And again, it doesn't have to be this loud, it doesn't have to be this garish, but this sort of like summarizes the idea. So if you take that principle and apply it to any kind of comics page and think about how are the things interacting with one another, right? And so the example I used in 136 as well is if you look at this Fantastic Four page by Walt Simonson, we follow Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, down from panel 1 to the bottom where we see Reed Richards' head in panel 2. Reed Richards' balloon leads us up to the time sled in panel 3. We follow that balloon above the time sled up to panel 4 where the Thing and Thor are talking, and we follow their balloons down to all the movement moving to the down and the bottom right of the final panel, right? This is part of that visual flow I mentioned a moment ago, is like guiding the reader's eye and using the relationships of images to create an effortless reading experience, right?
Yeah, there's a path. There's an approachable path through the page that was clearly intentional. So the artist may have been using an intuitive process to create the result, but to understand the result or to troubleshoot it, as you put it, Jerzy, which I think is a good point, where you're like, hey, wait a minute, how do I tighten this up a little bit more? You need to have some kind of language to break it down, and to see how it could be improved.
Right. So like where this comes into play for me, and maybe this is a little bit on the groundy kind of stuff, but is when I'm thumbnailing my books, and I'll pull up some Boulder and Fleet script, some older script. I'll often know what's going to happen on the page, roughly, and like I've taken to like writing actual like paragraphs of like, okay, so here's I'll find the page that updated this week. Oh, I didn't actually write a description of that one. Okay, Sapphire's heartbroken. Agnes sees her crying, tells Roxanne, we got to help her. We're a team, right? That's essentially what happened on the latest page. Mm-hmm. And then from that description, I'll start thumbnailing, roughing out these little stick and bubble versions of the page, right?
Okay, yep.
And often it'll start with, like, maybe even just grabbing, like, moments. Like, if you can see on the screen there, I sketched out the content of the panel without knowing what relationship it was going to have to anything else in the page. I just know what I wanted the moment to look like. And then this little rough, crude thumbnail there becomes my first investigation of how those image relationships are going to work out. And after doing a few of these little tiny blue versions with blue pencil, I'll go, well, which one's working, which one's not? Well, this one seems to be almost there, but why isn't it all the way there? And then that's when I go back to this thinking about, okay, well, let's look at the visual flow. Let's look at the clarity. Let's look at the rhythms, right? And as a matter of fact, I'm about to drop on the Boulder and Fleet Patreon an example of a sequence I had to completely redraw because the rhythm was completely wrong. And I didn't know it until after I sat and looked at it for a couple days. Like, it just feels weird. I don't know why. And then I realized, oh, that's what's missing. I got to redo this whole 2 pages. Anyway, so yeah, those are 3 checkpoints that I have. Is visual flow, clarity, and rhythm.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So yeah, it's I can use those to say, am I accomplishing this? Is it flowing? Does it just kind of flow like plop, or does it flow like, oh, do do do, or dun dun dum, or boom, dun dun dun? You know, like this.
Or is it flowing like,
effort.
I mean, music is a perfect metaphor for this. And I heard a marvelous thing. I saw Brian Fee's talk at the Ann Arbor District Library. Brian Fees is the cartoonist who did a graphic novel called Mom's Cancer. And he made the comparison to pop music. He said, if you take pop music and you separate the music from the lyrics, a lot of the time you're going to end up with really lousy poetry and really repetitive music. Like, but you put them together, and something really wonderful happens, and suddenly you're transported to when you're 14 years old, or you're transported to, you're thinking about the person you love most in your life, or you're thinking about heartbreak, right? Comics does this thing where it's taking, like, very, sometimes garish, cartoony art with a very bouncy and often unnatural kind of dialogue, and turning it into something really transportive and also larger than the things that go into it. So, but anyway, but like,
that is awesome. Is that a talk online or anything, or is that
it will be? It's going to be on aadl.org eventually.
Cool.
It was videotaped, so it was a great talk. But comparing it to music, I mean, I often compare comics to music and poetry. I think they share a lot of DNA with those two things. And when you think about, not even like ba ba ba, but like right? That has a rhythm.
Yeah.
That has a certain kind of flow and a seesaw kind of thing. You can do that visually if you think about how panels work. So, and then this comes back to the thing that I always harp on in my comics classes is you're really playing with shape, size, line, and color. These 4 elements that are recombined in a million ways to make interesting comic stories. So, like, when you think about, like, size, bigger things take longer to happen. Bigger things imply longer periods of time, more beats, but also shape does that too, right? So maybe I should just, maybe this would be a time for me to actually do some like quick doodling on the screen to
yes.
demonstrate this idea.
That'd be perfect.
All right, well, let me pull up my canvas here, and if I say, let me grab my proper pen. Here's my favorite pen. A square shape has a certain kind of, it sets an expectation of rhythm, right? Here's a beat. Here's like 1, 2, here's 1, 1. But how does that change the moment I make that panel this shape? When I make it into a skewed rectangle now, right? Suddenly it feels more dynamic. Suddenly it feels more off balance. And off balance is filled with potential. Off balance means you could fall. Off balance means you could fall into something. You could leap into something. Walking is someone once described as just stopping yourself from falling over and over again, right? Being off balance means that there's a dynamic energy at work, which is why in things like Dragon Ball, you see in like Toriyama's work. Oh, I just did Krillin's nose completely wrong. You see these kinds of panel panel shapes, right? These very slanted, diagonal panel shapes, and also
I wonder if we've, yeah, it looks like we've cut out a little bit. I'm sure Jerzy will be right back in a moment. I wonder, yeah, let's see. I don't think I can switch the camera to my screen to do a little bit of doodling and exploration, but I can think out loud a little bit while we're waiting for Jerzy to come back. For those of you listening live, let's see. It's funny. The only Dragon Ball Z I've read, I've thumbed through it on the shelf a few times. I've seen the entire series, all the videos, and have like referred to the comics, but just haven't just jumped in and committed because I don't know. It's there's a lot there. Totally worth doing though one of these days. And it looks like one of Jerzy's machines has dropped out, and now both of them have dropped out, and hopefully we'll see them both come back very soon. And taking a look here, do I have any kind of message or anything? So, okay, but I did notice there's speed lines. My gosh, speed lines stand out all over the place. Energy, and clouds mixed with sort of like really strong thinking of like like buildings and in basic shapes and structures and whatnot. It's kind of with this interesting contrast in sort of the designs. And a lot of times I've seen them in like Shonen Jump, where I've checked out some Dragon Ball. Anyway.
Were you vamping for me, Rob?
I was vamping. I was thinking about how I actually haven't bought a lot of Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z comics, but I've seen the whole series. And I have sampled a few comics here and there. But one of those things when there's a whole series out, it's a little daunting to just go like, whoop, I'm going to get all those right now.
Yeah.
Or it's awesome too because it's this amazing giant thing. But yeah, you were exploring the kind of different expectations with that sort of rhombus panel shape.
Oh, wow. Is that when I dropped out?
Yep.
Okay. Let me pull it back up. Because I was drawing Krillin, and I was like pandering to Rob's tastes with this.
Speed lines. It's awesome.
Yep, speed lines.
So many speed lines.
But so we talked about, size, right? This is our size relationships. Different size panels do different kinds of rhythm. Then different shapes, right? Cause different kinds of rhythms, cadences. And then finally there's lines. And color too, but for our purposes today, we're only going to focus probably mostly on these three. So like This one has a jagged line. This one has a smooth line. And that creates a different expectation of not just emotional content, but also like this panel here is the big dun 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 moment, right? And if you think about even the thickness of the lines you use in your panels, and when you're reading comics, look closely at what kinds of lines different artists are using. Are they doing a freehand panel border, right? Are they doing rounded corners? Is it very thin, tight, precise lines, right? That feeds into the feeling that you get when reading the comic. Does it have like a staccato, kind of regimented chopsticks kind of rhythm, or does it have more of a mellow kind of swimming kind of rhythm, right? The lines contribute to that.
Yeah, they do. I'm also noticing the in your layout example too. There's a lot of space between the sort of upper grouping of panels, and then the sort of padding between them and then that big emphasis panel.
That's a lovely observation. Thank you for that too. Yes, size also relates to the spaces between the panels. Do you have very tight gutters? Gutters being the spaces between the panels, or do you have wider gutters? And that's what we're going to be playing with the paneling tool in the next section, right? That contributes to it as well. So all this is to say is that these are choices I think we make, again, rather intuitively. All I'm trying to do is point us at the tools that we have so that we can make a few of those choices a little bit more consciously when the time comes, right?
What about, let's see, when you're thinking about flow and reading direction, can you do some of that planning at the paneling stage, or do you have to have your balloon, or are they sort of like squished together, thinking about your word balloon layout and your paneling layout?
Again, I want to be very careful about this and say that for me, and I think for a lot of people, for people who write visually, okay, because like one of the things that also came up in that Brian Feast talk was he was talking about how he writes a script. He actually types out a script and then draws based on that. Whereas I'm one of those people who like this. I mean, this is let me find a page that's not a spoiler. This is literally how I write, right? I thumb it out in these tiny little blue versions, and then I blow it up to like a 4-inch by 4-inch sketch. So, and then another thing that I've pointed out in the past is sometimes I have a sense of the rhythm of the dialogue before I know exactly what is being said, right? So if you look at panel 1 there, we see Agnes is digging through the ground, coming at Boulder, and she says something antagonistic. And then Boulder has a comeback. And then, whoop, drops the tractor plow on top. And then, crung, she pops up. And I think I intended her to say something muffled in there, but I dropped that idea. I just stuck with the action. So, but what's being said and what's happening is something that kind of flows back and forth for me when I'm writing. So I'll start sketching out. I want the moment to feel this way, and then and they should be saying something along this line. I'll, generally speaking, drop in a balloon to like mark that space. This is the space that dialogue gets, but that can move around, right? So like as I do multiple passes at the page, I'm no, those balloons should go down over here because that will create a better flow this way, right? And that's another reason I love Manga Studio as a whole is that at the penciling, inking, and lettering stages, I have a lot of flexibility in moving that stuff around after the fact, right? So like sometimes I'll think I really nailed it on the thumbnail level, but then when I get it on the actual canvas and I'm drawing it, I realize, oh, it doesn't work at all that way. A good example is not in this group of thumbnails, but it's the first appearance of Rube, the crystal gal with the ruby crystals that shoot lasers. Upon her first appearance, I was trying to go for like a really non-traditional reading flow, not to challenge the reader, but to like sort of make you look in certain places in the panel. And I showed it to some friends to try to get some feedback to say like, well, how am I doing this right? Is this confusing? And I got a lot of different feedback on how I should actually employ it, because some people were really leaning towards the clarity of the balloon reading experience, while other people were leaning more towards the visual experience of like guiding the reader's eye through the page. So that's another thing to point out. Everybody's opinions are going to be different on this kind of thing, and this really comes down to, you know, trusted eyes and your gut, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's, I mean, it really is going to be that back and forth though, likely, where I think you can appreciate your style more by well, thinking through this stuff and getting the feedback, but then some feedback may have a truth to it, but it may not align to your intent and style. So that's always fun to navigate. You're like, now what?
And sometimes it starts with really dumb, simple decisions of looking at the spread, right? So like I thumbnail in these dummies because I like getting to look at the way the spreads are going to work in the final book. And I'll say, you know, I've got a lot of horizontal panels going on. I need to offset that. We're going to go vertical for a little bit. I mean, that's an arbitrary choice, but that becomes a design constraint that helps me find new moments in the story, right? So just to change up the visual flow of the thing. Like previously in the book, I was having a lot of these kind of like 3-tiered horizontal pages, and then just for the purposes of visually changing things up to keep it more dynamic and interesting, I went to an all vertical flow. Right?
That's really cool. So yeah, and you're able to do that. That's obviously that's independent of Manga Studio. So that's an interesting benefit. So maybe and this is a little bit on the groundy, but that might be something to keep in mind, like keeping a gallery of your work somehow to make it easy to preview, where you're getting, you know, like that's there's other routes to even that technique too, where you're like able to get sort of this cumulative, you know, ability to observe the work so far, or where it's going.
Well, yeah, and if you get Manga Studio EX, which is the more expensive version, it has sort of like a page view like that, where you can actually see all of your the pagination of your book as it's coming together.
Which, fancy me or whatever, I have it, but like it was on sale too. Like sometimes the EX is crazy cheap also. And again, it depends on like, you know, which one are you hunting for the deal on, the downloadable one or the one on the discs. But anyway, yeah, it does have the whole the story and the story view, which lets you see all your pages.
Right.
And sort of like it's which, wow, does that actually emphasize the idea that it's dedicated to comics, right? Where it's, you know, here's a collection of pages laid out as if and where you see the spreads where they would be and all that. Pretty cool. In sort of a comic project format.
Oh, so do you feel like we kind of did 10,000 feet up, and do you want to go on the ground in a second, or is anything else?
I think there's a lot of concerns. Like I was wondering if there's like any sort of gotchas at this level, you know, like
gotchas,
things that would like be, or really great to keep in mind. Like, hey, don't forget your lunch when you're paneling.
like a pre-flight checklist.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, like so there are sort of like rules of thumb that I like to think about when I'm doing this stuff. And again, this isn't something where I've got it on a clipboard hung up on the wall and I look at it every day and do my chant. But it's more like, okay, when I sense something's wrong, let's go through this checklist and see, like, well, is it this? Is it this? I don't know. So I just spent a lot of time talking about like shape and size evoking rhythm, right? So like, am I playing with that? And also thinking about how is the art interacting with everything else in the panel, like that dead man example that I showed. You know, like is the mega unit of the page its own kind of storytelling as well as what's happening in the panels, right? And then the other one that I really get fascinated by, and the thing that continues to make this medium such a rewarding and rich experience for me, is thinking about traditional reading direction and how I can break it judiciously, right? How can I change, how can I, in the spirit of doing something that only comics can do, how can I take full advantage of the medium and the fact that when you look at a painting, you don't just scan left to right, top to bottom like you do a book, but you still have to observe that. You still have to go, everything, generally speaking, should go from the upper left to the bottom right, because that's how we read, at least in the West.
Mm-hmm. That's a good heuristic, right?
Yeah. How can I honor both of those at once? And so I have an example, and I used this one in the Dan Michigan episode as well, but this is a page from Boulder and Fleet where I feel like I was playing with it in a playful way, but in a way that didn't confuse anybody, right? And so when you look at this page and you look at the version on the left, there's no question how to read the page, right? You know where you should be going, but then I traced out where your eye is going. And it's like that Fantastic Four page where you go down and then back up and then down. And even the panel I designed, the triangle panel of Boulder in panel 3, right, points back up to him as if to say, this is sort of nested in the previous panel, right? It's sort of happening to give it a sense of overall simultaneity, also to give it a sense of flow, where I'm guiding you through the page and making you look, or hopefully making you look at everything you need to look at in order to get the full scope of all the action that's happening and what specifically is happening, right? Is there any question as to what Roxanne is doing in panel 2, right? That kind of thing. So finding ways to observe and honor traditional reading direction without, but also wrestle with it, right? Playfully wrestle with it.
Yeah. Well, because it's inherently, it is living side by side with a lot of depictions and visual symbols that aren't just letters also, right? And that is really, it's something to take advantage of. So
it's there if you want it, right? I mean, like, okay. I would never tell anybody only good comics always do this, right? But I'm more or less pointing to its availability, right? And I personally, my bias is I love that about comics, and I love doing things that would. Okay, I'm gonna. This is potentially a shortcoming of mine, but I like to design pages that would make a film director go, "How am I going to do that?"
Okay. So that's hopefully you have a panel of film directors that are ready to just sort of like pull at their hair and when they read your stuff, or go like, Psh, "I got that one, Jerzy," and you'd be like, "Ah, darn it."
Yeah, and then I'd be like, "All right, well, I got to try again."
Yeah,
because that's what keeps this stuff interesting, right?
Yeah. Because that's all right.
But then, as far as like gotchas, like things to watch out for, things that I try to like not do, is I try not to drive the reader back into the page in the final panel, right? So what I mean by that is, and actually I should have kept that example up, and I'll pull it back up right now. You look at the direction of the action in the bottom right of the panel. Which direction is it going? Right? It's leading you out to the right of the page, right? If I reverse that action and had Roxanne smashing into Boulder going to the left, that would lead your eye towards the spine of the book, if this was a book, which is not going to stop you from turning the page, but it doesn't feel as elegant as leading your eye off in that direction to get you to turn that page, right? It's a dumb little thing, but it's something I notice, right? So, like, I try not to have characters turned toward the left of the page. I try to have all movement and all direction facing the right of the page in the final panel, right? And then another one I would say, and I can pull up Manga Studio for this, I would be careful about how you stack your panels. So, like, if I go like this, I'm going to draw, like, a panel layout real quick, okay? And I designed the page like this, where I have, and this would be hard to describe it for the audio listeners, but panel 1 is a square in the upper left-hand corner. Panel 2 is immediately next to it. Panel 3 is below panel 2, but then panel 4 spans the whole height of the page. Panel 5 is a horizontal page underneath panels 1, 2, and 3, right? And then panel 6 and 7 are nested underneath panel 5. So if I chart this, if I chart the reading direction on this, right, it becomes kind of problematic. Like, how do I read this thing? Is it like that? Is it...
It's very problematic.
Right? Is it like this? Right? So you got to be careful how you stack your panels so as to that there's no question that which direction the reader should go. And if you ever have to put in arrows to guide the reader, which is what old comics used to do.
Oh, wow. That's a super old-timey thing. I've not encountered that, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, like if you look at like old Justice League comics, like the Gardner Fox Justice League comics from the 60s, you'll see this happen a lot on the page. They'll have like really complicated panel arrangements, and they'll sort of solve the problem by putting a little arrow like this. Like, that's where you should go next, and that's where you should go next.
Oh, funny.
And
okay.
As somebody who teaches kids, I see kids doing this all the time, which I find fascinating, because I don't remember if I did it or not. But I'll see kids solve these problems like, well, I don't want to redraw the page, so I'm going to put an arrow in there.
Okay.
So, but yeah, this is where like putting a second pair of eyes on it is always a good idea. But generally speaking, you just want to make sure that, and I'll just change my ink color so I can sort of make this point a little bit clearly. Remember that reading direction almost always goes from the top left to the bottom right, right?
One thing, just, and not to, this isn't really a hardcore devil's advocate thing or whatever, but something about what you were describing, and this probably happens naturally. It's like watch something, watch a documentary or whatever, and we're like, and this is where they failed or whatever, and you get this clear example of like what not to do. I will often go like, oh crap, I've done that, right? And so I imagined, and I was wrong actually. While you were just describing this, I pulled up Art Geek Zoo. And because I thought, oh, I think on page 4 or 5 I did this, like this exact thing. But what's funny is one of the reasons I worried about it is because I think it actually represents a case where what I actually didn't do it, but it might be interesting. Where if you imagine like a set of busy panels on the left, where it's almost like a this group of people trying to get a reaction out of someone who is judging them on the right. Right, but then we're almost like you keep looking at that darn giant column, and expecting like, what are they going? But it's the same stoic reaction, like where all and so it's almost like it's fun to jump back and forth. Anyway, not that is like a strong case or whatever, but like,
oh crud, I can't find the page.
Thought experiment to say like maybe there are cases where you would want that, but it's making that call judiciously and having where you are making the case, knowing that you're breaking this heuristic, and if you're doing it just to do it, that's maybe not a strong case. But
I think that's a great contextualizing that, Rob, because actually there is a case where I did exactly this in my graphic novel, The Front Rebirth, which you can find at thefront.me. It's in chapter 4. I was trying to find the page while you're talking, but it would take too long because I have really poor navigation on that website. But there's a scene where I can just actually sketch it out real quick. It's at a comic convention, and we follow two characters. Actually, we follow one character. We follow Thirsty as he's navigating the crowd at the con and interacting with people. Right? He says something, she says something, he says something, she says something, and so on. And they have this whole thread of conversation that's happening between these two characters. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Meanwhile, there's a strip that runs along the side of the page where we have two characters who are watching Thirsty navigating the crowd, and they're talking amongst themselves while they're watching what's happening over here. And it was intentionally designed to be something where you can read it like this, zigzag back and forth between those two tiers, or you could read it like this and read it like this, where you just go straight down on each side. And it was specifically designed to work either way. So I made a big case out of clarity. Sometimes ambiguity is what you want, right? Chris Ware. Look at Chris Ware comics. His are specifically designed to make you wander and not follow one tradition. Jason Shiga's Meanwhile is a perfect example of this, where it was really meant for you to wander, right?
Yeah.
So these kinds of gotchas are always dangerous because, yes, they are based on my personal experience, my heuristic, and they're sort of defying me to break them, right? It's like, don't lead the reader back into the page on panel 3 unless you find a really good reason to do it.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, a constraint isn't a deterministic trap or
Yeah.
building block. It's something to consider in design with or around.
Yeah. Okay. Want to start actually doing some layout?
I do. I'm excited to get into the paneling tools in Manga Studio.
All right. So in about 1 minute and 30 seconds, I'm going to start working with Rob to actually use the paneling tool in Manga Studio and explore some of the neat things that it can do. But before we do that, we have to thank some people, Rob, don't we? We got to thank some very important people in our lives. And I'll pull it up right now.
Our Patreon sponsors. Patreon
And
supporters. Patrons.
If you go to patreon.com/leanintoart, you can support this show. You can make it more sustainable by pledging a monthly amount. And we've got some people that we want to thank for being Patreon supporters and making this show sustainable. Angela Mitchell. And on Twitter, she is Angie Makes Stuff. She's a gardener and cartoonist at Trixie'sTales.com. Also, Spencer Hallam at SpencerHallam.com. Spencer, HALLAM.com. Teaching artist and illustrator. Thank you, Spencer. J.S. Rao at EO_JANDE. Illustrator, musician, developer, eorbits.com. Thank you, JS. Always great to interact with you on the Patreon feeds. Jay Taylor at Taylor_FS3. Comic book artist at OnTheSquareComics.com. And Khalid Birdsong. Khalid Birdsong on Twitter. Cartoonist, teacher, fried chicken, and sushi.com. Thank you guys so much for supporting us on Patreon. It means a lot to us. And if you guys want, if you're not supporting us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/leanintoart. We have a monthly, what do we call it? The open mic feed, right,
Yeah.
Rob?
It's a monthly discussion thread where we throw out a prompt, and it's just there for us to sort of react and share the kinds of things that we're working on or things we're chewing on. It's like it's very lean into art like conversation, but it's with just our patrons. And of course, there's also Extra Lean, and that is the other podcast we do in between Lean Into Art. So we're podcasting every week. It's just that Extra Lean is at our Patreon feed. And that is where Jerzy and I we improvise. And we're like, who knows what we're going to talk about? But we hit record and talk.
And it's a lot of fun. I love doing that show. All right. So, you want to do some on-the-ground stuff? Should I play the music?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's time to go on the ground and figure out this paneling. And I'm so curious because I've played around with Manga Studio 4, but I hadn't got into the panels in this new world. Help me out, Jerzy.
Okay, so the way I'd like to go about doing this is start by just diving into the paneling tool in general, and then try to do, if there's time, try to do a layout, like a sketch a layout, and then use the paneling tool to conform to your sketch layout. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'm excited.
All right, so the paneling tool is in the lowest rung of your toolbar in Manga Studio. And actually, I should pull up my Manga Studio so we can look at what I'm doing, and then you'll try it. We'll let you take a swing at it, right, Rob? So the trick, one of the nice things and annoying things about Manga Studio is it really does its best to get its interface out of your way, but to do that, it has to nest a lot of tools in other tools. And so it kind of becomes tricky to find the paneling tool. It might look like, and I'm hovering over the bottom of my toolbar here, it might be your straight line tool is what you find there, like 3 above or 4 up from the bottom of your toolbar. It might be the ruler tool that you see there, a blue triangle. It might be the scattered streamline tool. It might be the saturated line, or the scattered saturated line tool. But if you click on any of those, it opens up this subtool menu on the right. If you've set your tool palettes to be the default setting in Manga Studio or Clip Studio Paint. And in there you'll find the frame tools. And I'll just quickly walk through a bunch of these. There is the rectangle frame, right? Makes a rectangle, right? Polyline frame, you get to draw a custom shape, right? Frame border pen, you get to freehand a panel. And they call them frames in Manga Studio. Frame, panel, interchangeable, right? And then underneath those, we have the divide frame folder and divide frame border. Now, real quick, we're going to be playing with our layer palette quite a bit here. And when we select like the rectangle frame tool, there's all these tool property settings we can mess with. We can say, let me expand this menu a little bit so we can see it better. We can say there's how to add. In other words, we can say when I draw a frame or a panel, what's going to happen? Is it going to add to a selected folder? Meaning, is it just going to make? Oh, I guess if I do that, it just makes it automatic. So, like, if I make a folder in here and I draw this panel tool, nope, I did not realize that that happens. Okay, so let me explain. When you draw a panel, it automatically creates what's called a panel folder in your layer palette. In other words, it's saying this container on the visual canvas is going to contain your art. But as far as layers are concerned, it's also going to sort of nest layers within it. So that if I draw on this layer, and then I draw on another layer, make another layer in that panel folder, it can sort of create a grouping of layers in that folder. Does that make sense? Just the way like regular layer folders work in Photoshop, right? And I can collapse it.
Okay.
I can collapse it, and this helps with like when you have like a lot of layers in your files. Like a Boulder and Fleet page will have upwards of 80 layers, so like layer management becomes very important to me. So this becomes like, we call this like panel 1, right? Now when I make new panels, I have a couple options here. It can add to the selected folder. In other words, it's going to carve a new panel inside of this mask, but it's still in this original folder grouping.
Oh.
See that?
Is that a good idea? Oh, because it's like a mask and it reveals the same art layers.
Exactly. So like if you want to just draw on one layer and just use the panels to sort of cut out the art, right? You could do it that way.
Yeah.
Or you can set it to create a new folder altogether. So if I draw another panel, we look at my layer palette, it created a whole new folder with the mask in the preview there on the right, right? Is this making sense so far?
It's making sense. So how did you do that? Those two different behaviors? Did you?
It's in the tool property menu underneath the subtool menu. Yep. See, nested, nested, nested. So I'll back up.
The good news is they're all comics tools, right? You're not suddenly in like, I don't know, like Photoshop seems to have this big landscape of like, filters and processing, a language of photography in there, and it's just anyway. So anyway, at least it's comics.
Well, yes, thank you for that optimistic view of it, because yes, I mean it could be potentially be frustrating, but the thing to remember is these were all designed for you to use. So yes, so here's the trail to follow. Is in the toolbar is the paneling tool icon. You click that, it opens up the subtool menu above, and that's where we can choose whether it's a rectangle, polyline, frame border, and so on. But then underneath that is the tool property menu, and there is where we can make the choice, right? There's draw border is a field we can check, and then the next field is how to add. Do we want to create a new folder or add to selected folder? Okay. Mm-hmm. Then we get to the divide frame folder and divide frame border. Now, this is where things get really cool and interesting with Manga Studio, in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this whole panel folder. I'm going to start with a brand new one. I'm going to do one that's like the whole width and height of my page.
Whoa. Okay.
And then I break out the divide frame border tool. And what this does is when I click and drag across, you can see that it sort of defines this gutter, and I can rotate it around, right? But as soon as I let go, as soon as I release my pen, it cuts that into two panels, right? And it's still a panel folder. We can see in the mask preview that it's one mask with 2 windows, and if I put a layer in this folder and start to draw, any place where the panel border exists, it was going to mask out that art, right?
I have 2 divide frame border tools. Are they different?
They are indeed different. So the one I just used is divide frame border, and that just divides the frame but leaves it in its original panel folder. But then the second tool, the other one that you see, is divide frame folder. Now if I use this one, it's going to divide it into 2 frames, but they're each going to become their own folder in the layer menu.
Wow. Okay.
And this is the one I use the most with Boulder and Fleet, and I should open up a Boulder and Fleet page shortly so I can show you and pull it apart and show you how it all comes together. But I'll often start with a border on my whole page, and then I cut it with the divide frame folder, and then I name these folders panel 1, right? And then call this one panel 2. And you can use this divide frame folder tool as many times as you like to carve up the page any ways that you need, and it'll just keep on making new folders in your layer menu. And you can toggle between them, and it gives you great visual feedback on which panel you're in just by tapping on that layer. And now it shows that this particular panel, everything else is masked out. You can only work in that panel. That's where you are now on the canvas, right?
Wow.
The blue area means you cannot draw in this area.
This is a lot easier than version 4.
Yeah, it's been so long since I've used version 4, but I remember using this one in 5 and being like, whoa, this changes everything. Now, things are going to get even more rabbit holey, because what I just showed you is only like 1/10 of the way through what you can really do to manipulate these things after the fact. The next tool, the 2 tools you use a lot in paneling in Manga Studio, at least what I use a lot, are the panel drawing tools, right? The rectangle frame, the divide frame folder, and then the next one is the operation tool. I don't know how much you use this one, Rob, but it's the cube with the little arrow pointing to it, and it's up towards the top. And when I choose the operation tool, look in the tool property menu here, we get a lot of different things we can actually edit about this. Now, one, I can start to monkey with the panel size and shape after the fact. I can move it. I can grab different points, the actual Bezier points, and change the panel size and shape. But if I look in the tool property menu, I can also say, hey, for instance, let's say I shrink it down like this. I can say snap to another frame border. I check that box in the tool property object menu. Now when I grow or stretch out this panel, it's automatically going to snap it when it aligns with any other panels on the page. Did you see that?
Wow.
So that makes aligning up your panels a lot easier. Should toggle that off. But then the other one, this one is really neat. You can tell it to work with another frame border. Now what that means is when I toggle that on, and if I stretch this panel out, it automatically adjusts all the other panels on the page to keep the gutters consistent. See that? I'll click on this one.
Wow.
So if I stretch this panel out...
Illustrator or Photoshop are just like, nope. Guess how much more work do you have?
Yeah, right?
Oh, my.
So if I stretch this out... Whoa, I don't know what I just did there. But
that
anyway...
is funky tone.
But if I have that box checked in the operation tool property menu, and I start moving panels around, it automatically adjusts the rest of the page to keep consistent gutters, right? Or I can shut that off. I don't need to use that if I don't want to. If I want like this one to have a wider gutter, that's no problem. I have that choice, right? The other thing we can do in this menu, in the tool property menu, while we have the operation tool selected, is we can change the border color, right? Set right there. We can change the border size. So we want to have certain panels have different widths than other panels. We can change that there. And then the other thing that is always worth noticing when you're playing around in these menus is if there's a little wrench in the bottom right-hand corner, that means there's even more options you can open in a sub menu. And so here we can go into things like we can change the brush size, which we just did. We can also create a spraying effect where we can say, like, hey, let's create like this sort of a jaggedy, rough border on this panel. We can change the actual brush tip, and you can go into your materials menu and choose, oh, I've got a whole bunch of brushes preloaded in here, and I can grab any one of them, and that can become the brush of the panel border, which changes the way it looks and feels. And I'll turn off spraying effects so we can see how that affects it. And so suddenly when I use this, I'm going to close some of these windows so we can actually see it up close. Right, we can see that the panel line now has a different quality because I changed the brush tip with which it was drawn. Right? And I can switch it back to circle at any time. Right? And I can make all of these changes long after I've drawn the thing. And that's the other thing that I really love about Manga Studio is whatever you drew is you can manipulate it in a variety of ways long after you've drawn it. So like when I throw ideas down on the page, I don't feel like I'm committed to anything, right? I can play with it quite a bit after the fact. So those are some of the affordances that we have with this. Now, what I would love to do is, if you're game, Rob, and I think we have enough time, try to do 2 versions of thumbnailing a page in Manga Studio and seeing how we can monkey with the look of it, and then use the paneling tool to chop it all up so you can start drawing it. Does that sound?
Yeah, sounds awesome. Let's give it a try. So
I'm just going to say let's just do, if you want to make a new document that's 2400 pixels by 2400 pixels, so it's square, that'll fit in the screen really nicely with all your windows open. And while you do that, I'm going to come up with a 3-moment script. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Right now my units, okay. Gotta switch my units to pixels, and then you said
2400 by 2400.
2400, okay. And 2400.
And everybody at home can follow along if they want. Actually, if you're listening or watching, I think it'd be really cool if you have Manga Studio, open it up and play along with this, and we'd love to see what you guys make with this. And share it on Twitter and @tweet us with it, and we'd love to maybe talk about it on the next show. Okay. And I'm going to go with something really straightforward and simple, based on an old workshop I did called Sequences and Consequences. Do you remember this one?
I think I do. Did it?
Okay.
Yeah. Did it involve Superman and Pikachu?
No. I remember that one.
Okay.
No, so and I really want you to stay with and I'll pull up your screen while we talk through this. 3 moments that I want you to doodle out real quick, and I'm hoping you can do like your kind of stick figure, square shaped torso figures that you do when you're doing your like unblocking project. Panel 1, a person waits for the bus. Panel 2, they look at their phone and they're alarmed by something. In panel 3, something is behind them.
Okay. Bus. A look at phone. So they look at the phone in panel 2?
They look at their phone and they're alarmed by what they see.
And alarmed. So, and then there's a bus behind. Then
something is behind them.
Something
menacing is behind them.
Okay, cool. All right, then something behind it. Okay. I'm going to just make a new layer and dim this one down here. And let's see. So they're waiting for a bus, right?
They're waiting for a bus.
All right. So let me think here. So I'm going to have to draw really small to start to think through here. And so there's a waiting. I want that to feel longer. So this is my whole page that I just kind of drew in a little square here. And I'm trying to think about the moments of what I want it to feel like. So I think I would have a person small and then just wait, chilling out, maybe some kind of, there's a street, whatever. But then it gets more zoomed in. This may not be the right moments, but they're like, oh, whatever, I'm checking my phone. And then I would have to say there's a hint of something coming along, and in that panel. And then in the third panel, it would be totally right behind them. I'm guessing also curious what's on their phone. So that's the tiny version. To fade that one down, I'll make a new layer. And you can see like my layout's totally different than your layout of panels. So it's funny, like I was cruising through my stuff here to figure this out. So so back to so then I would do more of a, this is the full size one. Oh. So funny, like the kind of distorted proportions and stuff that happen when I thumbnail. When let's see, I think this person's going to be chilling out next to, let's say, like a classic light pole, and there's a bus stop sign, and maybe a bench, and whatever, some other like stuff on the corner where this would go up to be like a light post or something. Let's see. Maybe their phone is actually doing a thing. This one where it's like alert, and so there's actually a little curious hint in the first panel, like there may be something happening on the phone. But then in the second panel, gonna have the zoomed in look of surprise, and then some kind of posture to back that up. And third panel will be then let's see, to me this is a look behind you thing of like, what does this mean? And then all of a sudden, some kind of
yeah, I intentionally left it vague so that like there could be a little playfulness in terms of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
this is great. Can I point out something that you did that I really, really love, is that you are not treating each of these moments as snapshots. You're treating these moments as sort of capturing a beginning, middle, and end all in one moment, right? So like, and what I mean by that is that, and this is another thing that comics can do really well, is that when I said panel one, person waits for the bus, the obvious choice is to just show them standing there and waiting. In panel two, they look at their phone. Okay, well, but how do I connect panels one and panel two so that that transition feels a little bit more natural, and also to make panel one not seem so static, unless you're going for static, right?
Absolutely.
That's
it's feeling out what does it feel like, and all of a sudden this doesn't just live on its own as like these are all moments I'm putting in a frame on a mantle somewhere. These are moments that connect to each other, and so to me there's hints of as far as where this is going. Like maybe I like to think of, well, I did a workshop called oh gosh, what was it called? The dramatic reveal one. Writing and drawing serial comics, the dramatic reveal. And the idea there was like, well, it's all about opening and closing questions within units of a story, but then units of a story goes all the way down to the panel. It doesn't just, it's not just a chapter or a book or a page. There's so I like, so my heuristic is I think of am I answering and opening up questions that help create expectations, that so there's some kind of as the reader is consuming this, they're playing along with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, comics at their best do that, right? Okay, and let's look at what else you've got going on here. You chose a angle and perspective in panel 1 that points to down and to the left, which leads us to panel 2. Characters looking over to the right, that pointed to the right in panel 3, and leading us off the page in panel 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
All lovely things. Now I'm going to ask you to hide that layer and try it again, but try a vertical. Do it you did a horizontal version. Now let's see if you can come up with a vertical layout.
All right. So let's see. There's I kind of treat this as a similar establishing thing. Maybe they're distracted looking up. There's maybe kind of a leaf or a piece of trash falling down. I don't know. A balloon getting away? Who knows? But then, whatever. There's a bus stop. Bus. And their phone is going off. Doing something. But then... so let's see. So you said go vertical. I don't know how vertical. Because I wouldn't want...
Only in the
I don't want
sense
a
that
lot of room for this other one.
It should be
It's like
vertical
a smaller
in the sense
beat.
that the top of the panel and the bottom of the panel should touch the top and bottom of the page. So that doesn't say anything about the width.
Vertical,
right?
vertical. All right. So then, that's interesting. Such a different thing. How would I do that? So it's funny because it's almost like the reading, like you're coming in, and then I want to go back up again. In this case, I really do want to force some kind of vertical event. So crap. I guess I'm going to have them looking up at their Now we're totally switching camera angle, and their phone is like. I can't see their face though. I want to see them freaking out. So anyway, I'm like playing with how can I have them freak out with no, I gotta see their face. There's nothing it just nope. Too much work needs to be done there as far as conveying that that surprise moment. So then I'm just gonna have them looking down. In the surprise at their whatever is on their phone and in panel 2. And then let's see, so then it's kind of going up like this, and then
I love how you're talking this through because you're demonstrating exactly the back and forth.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it is this dynamic puzzle to solve, really, of connecting these moments. And what would be an interesting thing to show in this one? It's almost like what could be so surprising. There's let's see. I don't know. Like a birthday cake is parachuting in? I don't know. So, parachuting birthday cake. So then it'd be turning around almost, but falling outside the panel. Sorry, I'm like, my scribbles go nuts. I can read this, but it's really, this is just for me, you know.
It's
so,
still relatively legible.
Yeah. So I'm like, it's almost like, so now they're so happy going to catch a cake. So what? Turn around, cake. All right. So, which I don't remember, that was the something behind you. Yeah. So I kind of I cheated a bit on the something behind you. So it could be cake, but then there's a monster. I've been chasing you and chasing this cake for all day. And I have a fork in one hand and a knife in the other.
Okay, now, extra layer of complexity.
Yeah?
I wonder if you could change your ink color real quick.
Yep.
And on both layouts, spot some balloons on there. And don't think too hard about what's actually being said, but just generally, like, think of like each balloon as representing like a unit of sentence. Like, big balloon is 2 sentences, small balloon is 1 sentence, tiny balloon is like ... But see if you can figure out like what would be a general rhythm of the dialogue and where would those balloons go in order to drag you through the page.
Mm-hmm. So now it does add another layer. So it's sort of like this is thinking about the day, thinking about should I the last time I made that special mac and cheese, it had the best spice ever. Can I pull that off again? And getting, you know what I mean, just whatever. I'm at the bus stop and this character's at the bus stop and their brain's wandering and thinking about, and all of a sudden this gives some kind of voice to the phone alert thing, like some kind of dingle dangle doodle doodle whatever Then this one. So I want to see that, and then what do I want to have? I don't know. There's yeah.
And this is where art might start changing, right?
Yeah, art would have to change. There's like, yeah, I mean, clearly I took up all the room with the art on this one. So I'll probably compress this down and decide if there's, balloons would need to go above or below. So there's a, nope, I don't like this one. So I'm going to get rid of that tail, but because it's going to be like, cake, and then, but this guy's like for me, not for you, whatever. Because that's ominous, when your cake gets taken away from you. But this one I have to scroll. I really like panel 2. I have to figure out here. So there's I'm not liking what I would. That's because that'd be boring to go like that, right? I want it to go burp, 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 up and down.
Right. So okay, but you're already halfway there. If you look at panel 1. You have the first balloon starting up in the top left where, naturally our eyes go. If you take that sound balloon for the phone ringing and move it up just a little bit so that's even with panel 2 character's chin, that leads us back up to the face, right?
Oh, yeah. So if this
that one moves up just a little tiny bit, boom. Now we've got that natural transition of going down and then back up, which would fight against that moving straight across the page.
Aha. Okay. So nice. It's I might try to
having that balloon right between his face and the phone, like sort of like guides our eye to start there on that panel rather than starting at the top.
I like it. So doot. Then it's almost like doot. But then I don't again, like the layout of panel 2 is problematic on this one. So
yep. Okay, well, let's go back to the first version and balloon that.
So that was this. Boop, boop. And then new layer. Okay. So, all right. Then, oh my God, this one is feels a lot easier. because I can see like I'm going to end right like the monster is like, yep, to me. And there's a natural, there's that little exchange is pretty natural right there. There's whoops, I swapped out. So this is a little interesting as far as having that longer. I almost would want to move the character over a little bit to all of a sudden. Yeah, I don't know which I would want to have first here as far as the thinking about the mac and cheese and getting it to taste just right again. Making what spice is going to make that, and all of a sudden but that's interrupted, and so what I want, it's almost like the interruption I want to be like, I want the bzz, bzz, the doodle doodle thing to happen, overlapping the incomplete thought about the planning dinner while waiting for the bus. And then let's see, doodle doodle doodle. So because then we got this. It's a lot of work. I'm almost.
Yep. Okay. So this is where we get into a really tricky place, because that whatever the final balloon in panel 1 should be, it should be towards the bottom left to guide us to the top of panel 2 in the bottom left, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's almost like, so this, if it could have the moments to sell it where it'd be like, yeah, there was that one thing that I used the last time that tasted so perfect, but then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I think that was, and so the phone interrupts again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost like the phone and this character are sort of having some impatient exchange.
This is exactly what it's like writing my pages. What you just did, that choice that you just made now, is exactly the kind of like little pleasant discoveries I'll make when I'm laying out the page.
So then so then if I could have that, and if I've bought into, that's awesome. And if I've bought into that, then is there kind of a transition where sometimes you're like, nah, or sometimes where you sell yourself on it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there'll be other times where I'll work it out and I'll be like, nah, it still doesn't work. But sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'll accidentally trip on like new character ideas. Like not an idea for a new character, but a new aspect of the character, right? Through these little exchanges. Like I was working on a dialogue exchange. This is very early on in the new Boulder and Fleet story where Sapphire and Rube were arguing, and I didn't land on her hiding her selfishness, Sapphire hiding her selfishness behind the word teamwork until I started ballooning the page. And I was like, oh, wait, I need her to say something here, but I don't want her to just telegraph exactly how she feels about it. And like in that interplay of trying to balloon and figure out the rhythm of the page, I landed on a character trait that I had not planned on. So this, I think, does that flow make sense to you on what you've done there? Does that feel natural to you? I
like it. I'm sold. I feel like I care more about the phone. I care more about the character, and like I was able to discover more, I've set out a plan that I think I can pull off.
All right. So then the next step would be to break out that paneling tool.
All right. So that's going to be here. And then
we need to look at your settings real quick, because sometimes the paneling tool settings. Oh wow, you got your tool set up in a totally different way than I do. I mean, that's another cool thing about Manga Studio is you can really customize the heck out of the interface. So when you check your rectangle frame border in your tool property window, which you should have open, I think, yeah.
Yep.
Underneath it says draw a border, then it says how to add, create a new folder. Then there's a checkbox for raster layer and a checkbox for fill inside the frame. Do you see those?
This happens to me all the time. This is one of the reasons why my layout looks so wacky.
If you want to reset it to default, or unless this is like your preferred.
Nope. I've kind of like bumbled into this one, and I'm good for now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, all right. So back to what were you saying?
You're looking for the tool property window. You got it? There it
Tool
is.
property. Yeah, right here.
Okay, so you can see at the bottom of that, underneath where it says add to selected folder, we want to switch that to create a new folder.
Okay.
And underneath that, there's two checkboxes. There's one that says raster layer and one that says fill inside of the frame. You want to uncheck fill inside of the frame. What that does is that automatically creates a layer with a white fill inside of the panel border automatically, which I can see its purpose, but for the purposes of doing what we're going to do here, you don't want that to happen.
Okay.
Let's look at your brush size. What's it set to? Is it not saying anything?
Point 3.
Let's bump it up.
Okay.
Just so we can see it better on the screen.
Oh yeah. So what? 4.
Let's like 1.0.
Okay.
Just because we're dealing with like a fairly low res image capture. All right. So the first thing we'll play with is tracing the panel border around the entire page, making one big mega panel that's going to be your page, right?
Okay.
And there we go. We can see at the top and bottom that there is some area being masked out now inside that panel folder. We see the panel folder appearing in the layer menu. Now, if you grab your operator tool, which is that cube with the little black arrow on it from your toolbar, this allows you to resize it. And so, like, when you throw down that initial panel, you don't have to worry about getting it absolutely perfect because now you can adjust it after the fact. So let's put a little bit of a margin in there. Yep, the green corners let you change the size, and then there's a blue dot at the top that lets you rotate it. I'm not gonna mess with rotating it right now. Okay. Cool. You have a nice even margin around the exterior of the page. Now we're going to go to the panel cutting tool, which is nested in the frame tools tool in your toolbar.
Operation object, right? So we'll do that. Sorry. Boop.
And we're going to choose divide frame folder. We're going to treat these panels as folders for now.
Okay.
And now you're going to cut the gutters just like we showed. Now, before we do that, let's look at the settings on it. In the tool property menu, you have dividing method, which divide frame folder and duplicate layer inside. So like for instance, if you had inks started in this initial frame 1 panel folder, it would actually duplicate the layers that are inside that. Like when it cuts it into 3 panels, like those layers will be repeated in each subsequent panel folder. So like in the case of, like a use case for this would be, let's say you make an inking layer and then a flatting layer inside of that panel folder. Now when you chop it up, those layers will be propagated to those other panels as well so that you don't have to recreate them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And then there's also, under dividing method, just divide frame folder and create empty folder, and then divide not folder but frame border, which is kind of redundant because you already have the divide frame border tool above. For our purposes, because you don't have any layers made in this panel folder yet, it doesn't matter which one you choose, but I just wanted to point your attention to that. And then underneath that, there should be a checkbox for space of frame border in preference. Do you see that? And underneath it, there's horizontal space and vertical space, right?
Yeah.
So this is, you can change the amount of width that your gutter will have if you cut vertically and if you cut horizontally. There are cases where you'd want to have those different. For my comics, I keep the gutters consistent whether they're horizontal or vertical. So you just want to make sure those two settings match. So what do you have it set to, like 0.8?
I did. I just switched it to 1.5 for both. What would you recommend?
I don't know what yours is set to. I think mine is set to. The unit is set to pixels. I think yours is set to points.
It is right now, yeah.
Yeah, so 1.5 should be fine. Mine's set to 50 pixels. For, but I mean, it changes from job to job. But we'll play with this because we can always change it after the fact. That's what undos are for. All right, so now that that's done.
Let me just see. So I just did an experiment.
Yep. I'd go a little wider than that for clarity's sake. One more thing I want to point you at, too. Maybe set it to, like, 3 points. So if you're drawing on something like a Microsoft Surface and you don't have a keyboard nearby, so you can't, like, hold, like, the Shift key to draw a perfectly horizontal cut on the panel, let's go to that wrench in the bottom right corner of your tool property menu. You get a dialog that pops up.
Mm-hmm.
Did you open it? Oh, it's
I
not
did.
showing it on the screen because you're actually.
Oh.
That's fine. I'll switch to mine real quick. It's because you're capturing Manga Studio instead of your screen. There's a checkbox in the subtool detail where it says step of angle, and if you check it, you can set it to say automatically snap to 45-degree angles.
Oh, nice.
And when you do that, then you can drag across your panel, and it will automatically snap to perfectly horizontal. So you don't have to use your Shift key if you don't have a keyboard handy. Boom.
Yeah, cool.
And boom. Your
Yep.
page is now cut into 3 panels. The next step would be is to label each of those panels. I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. I did a quick little demo myself. I want to walk through one other thing with this that I think is kind of neat.
All right.
Okay. So I'm going to do my screen cap real quick. So here's a page that I just did. And the next thing I would do is label, this is panel 1, right? And just for good layer management, because like I said, if you start getting into a lot of layers, it can become a nightmare to navigate all your panels. This is panel 3. And then this would be panel 2. And then another layer management thing that you have in the layer menu, and I don't see yours is on in yours, Rob, but you can like toggle on a whole bunch of different things that appear in your layer menu by hitting the little arrow and 3 lines in the top left corner of your layer palette. You can color code these things. You can add, right? I can color label each of these layers or layer panel folders to help me at a glance be able to see which one is which. So
Okay. Cool.
But
yeah.
But just labeling them, naming them properly, I think will go a long way. So then the next step would be is like you would, throw another layer on top of these thumbnails and start penciling over top of them, right?
Yep.
And then inking them each in their individual panel folders. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to open up an older Boulder and Fleet page so we can look at the panel structure or layer structure in there, just to show you like how far it goes. Does this seem pretty straightforward so far?
Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense. I hadn't updated my knowledge with these with the panel tools, and to the extent I've been using Clip Studio Paint I used it at least half of last year, getting into it, but it was mainly for just illustration, no panel work. Just did some unblocking posts with it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's not as much call for breaking out the panel tools.
No, not yet. This is awesome.
So here's how one of my Boulder and Fleet pages are put together or structured. And by the way, I mean, if anybody wants to support the comic on Patreon, if you subscribe at the Team Fleet level, I actually share high-res layered versions of the files, both in Photoshop and Manga Studio format, so that just to let people pull them apart and see how they're put together. So I have my topmost folder is my inks, and each of those are divided into panel folders like we just did, right? There's panel 3, panel 4, and panel 5. And that's just the inks. So if I hide this layer, we can see that the colors are all below. Below that, in the colors folder, I put all my color on one layer, on a flats layer, and then I duplicate that and do the editing on the color layer. And then I'll usually put on a few extra layers of like textures, and I'll do like a few color adjustments. Like if you look at the final panel, panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, did a hue and saturation adjustment because originally it was more orange. And I thought it really should be more purple, that kind of thing. But in the end, it winds up being only 4 folders. But when I start opening up all of these panel folders, you can see all of the layers that begin to happen. A lot of layers in there.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I'm curious. I see this. So you have a word balloon interacting with a panel.
Yeah. Right here in the second to last one.
The mba.
Yeah, the mba. What panel is that? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Panel 4. So I'll go find my panel 4. And yes, panel 4's lettering is on its own layer. And then what I did is where is the mba panel balloon? Right here. Okay. So what I did is I did what's called a layer mask. Right? You're familiar with those, right, Rob?
You've been help. Let's see.
Yes,
I've done them in Photoshop, but
it's the same idea. It's exactly the same as in Photoshop. So I'll just delete this mask real quick. There's what the actual art is. Then you can just make a layer mask, and then grab my eraser tool, and then I can just mask out the bits of the balloon.
A layer mask on the balloon.
On the balloon, so that because like the balloon's a vector image, so I can't erase that without rasterizing it. I don't want to rasterize it because that means I can't edit it anymore. But I can just throw a layer mask on top of it, and there's a few quick little paint strokes and eraser strokes, and suddenly it's fully integrated into the art.
That's sweet. Okay.
But yes, so like even this poip sound effect here, where she's pulling her head out of that tractor plow, that's nested in a folder, right? So there's the fills, there's the line art, and then there's like clipping layers applied over top, so I can change the colors of it after the fact. So yeah, so you quickly run into a boatload of layers in these things, and so I just make sure that I label them all very clearly. Like this is the panel 1 rocks layer. There's the rock soft inks. There's the blur lines. There's the dust. If I remove any one of those, you see there's the dust goes away. Make the rocks go away. Rock soft inks. I ink on multiple layers, so that makes it easier to do color holds and color management on the image. So, but I mean this is admittedly a very complicated way of drawing and sort of future-proofing my art. My students, I see them all the time. They'll bust out their they'll do all their panel cutting like you did, but then they'll do all their inks on one layer, So, I don't know. How you feeling about what we covered today, Rob?
I think it's awesome. I seriously, I feel it was a big piece missing in my updating my knowledge in Manga Studio. So I super appreciate the lesson, and yeah, that's it's neat to see how it could be applied on a very simple level where, I mean, you get a lot of, maybe there's a tiny bit of study and ramp up to like, oh, I can get familiar enough with this tool to lay out panels, but then lots of power from there where it's essentially an auto mask at that point too, where you could just you could do a lot of work on like one layer of inks, one layer of colors, whatever, and visual effects or whatever, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. But if you want, it's you can make essentially every panel its own project conceptually with all the depth that you could go for. So thank you. That was awesome.
Cool. If anybody who watched this or listened to this thought it was useful, a great way you can say that you got something out of it that costs you nothing is to go to iTunes, give the show a star review, however many stars you think it deserves. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, giving the video a thumbs up helps more people find the show. And you can find show notes for these episodes at leanintoart.com, and that's where you can also subscribe to the show and find all the other stuff we were talking about, including the Patreon page at patreon.com/leanintoart. So, final thoughts.
I'm stoked to do another comic project, and yeah, it's just whittling in the background, getting more knowledge on this stuff. Manga Studio does save me time, as far as I like using the digital tools. I like just discovering these new helpful things that are laying there. I just have to get familiar with it. So yeah, I do intend to use this. I don't know exactly when. That's how a lot of my side projects work. So, but yeah, good little place to work out.
I agree, and actually that we should throw a teaser that was kind of what we talked about in the latest Extra Lean. We talked a little bit about that, me challenging you to
yep,
to ship something a little bit looser. I'd also like to hear from the leaners as to any specific part of Manga Studio that they find is especially irksome that we could dive into in a future episode. That would be super fun too. Like I said, I teach
really good counterpoint.
Yeah, like I said, I teach a class on this, so I'm spending a lot of time digging into the nooks and crannies of it, and plus I've been using it for a couple of years, so there's a lot of neat stuff in it. But yeah, thanks for playing along with me today, Rob. And
my pleasure, Jerzy. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been fun to see you dive into this and to benefit from all of your study on that. So I think we will definitely come up with more things in the future. So again, hearing pain points, I look forward to diving into it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another show. And until then, everybody, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. We're going to kill the stream. Good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.